Zareth Tvel's tentacles quivered with unease as he crouched behind a jagged rock formation, his recording device clutched tightly in his grasp. The battlefield stretched out before him, a chaotic swirl of explosions, smoke, and alien screams. The Morrigan platoon he'd been embedded with was clearly outmatched. Their enemy, the Krex Dominion, had superior numbers, advanced artillery, and a reputation for leaving no survivors. Morale had plummeted. The once proud warriors of the Morrigan species now huddled in makeshift cover, exchanging grim looks that betrayed their resignation to defeat. Zareth, a war correspondent for the Galactic Coalition's news nexus, had covered dozens of conflicts across the galaxy. He had witnessed heroic last stands, miraculous victories, and devastating losses, but this was a slaughter. His mind raced with thoughts of what to broadcast, how to describe the impending massacre without succumbing to his own panic. Then, through the thick haze of the battlefield, a foreign roar echoed, a deep, guttural battle cry that cut through the cacophony like a blade. Zareth's keen eyes focused on a distant ridge where a squad of humans emerged. There were maybe 20 of them, clad in mismatched armor that looked scavenged rather than manufactured. They bore primitive-looking projectile weapons and carried what appeared to be nothing more than crude explosives strapped to their belts. To Zareth, they seemed ill-prepared, ill-equipped, and frankly ill-advised. His appendages twitched involuntarily. Reinforcements? This small group would barely count as a distraction, let alone a turning point. The humans didn't hesitate. They charged downhill with reckless abandon, their shouts growing louder as they approached. The Krex forces redirected their fire, and Zareth braced himself for what he assumed would be their immediate annihilation. But then, something extraordinary happened. The humans didn't scatter under the heavy artillery fire, they leaned into it. One soldier tossed a smoke grenade that exploded into a thick, opaque cloud, obscuring their movements. Another hurled a metal canister that detonated with an ear-splitting bang, sending Krex infantry into disarray. The humans moved like a single entity, their actions synchronized without the need for communication. It wasn't precision, at least, not the kind the galaxy's elite military units prided themselves on. It was something more primal, something chaotic yet effective. They were predators cornering their prey. Zareth's camera zoomed in, capturing a soldier who had taken a direct hit to his leg. The wound was gruesome, yet the human didn't retreat, or even slow down. He dragged himself forward, using his arms to lob an explosive device into the Krex's defensive line before collapsing with a defiant grin on his face. The explosion tore through the enemy ranks, scattering them like dry leaves in a storm. The Morrigan troops, inspired by the ferocity of the human assault, began to rally. Emboldened by their unexpected allies, they joined the fray, laying down suppressive fire as the humans breached the enemy's outer defenses. Zareth couldn't believe what he was seeing. The humans weren't just fighting, they were reveling in it, their shouts of defiance growing louder with every Krex they felled. A particularly striking figure caught Zareth's attention. A human woman, her face streaked with dirt and blood, wielded a weapon that appeared to be malfunctioning. She discarded it without a second thought and leapt onto a Krex soldier, using her bare hands to crush its windpipe. Another Krex charged her from behind, but before Zareth could cry out in warning, she pivoted and drove a knife into the attacker's thorax in one fluid motion. It was as though the humans operated on a different set of rules. Where most species relied on superior technology or meticulous strategy, these humans relied on something far more terrifying: audacity. They adapted on the fly, using whatever was at their disposal: explosives fashioned from Krex supplies, improvised barricades made from wreckage. Even the battlefield itself became a weapon in their hands. A small crater, likely formed by a Krex artillery strike, became a strategic choke point after the humans herded their enemies into it. The tide of the battle shifted so quickly that Zareth could hardly process it. The Krex, once a picture of discipline and dominance, now scrambled in panic, their lines broken by the relentless assault. The Morricans surged forward, taking full advantage of the chaos. Victory, once unthinkable, was now inevitable. Zareth's attention snapped back to the humans. They didn't stop when the Krex began to retreat. They pursued with relentless energy, their shouts echoing across the battlefield like a hunting pack closing in on its prey. Zareth could hear their laughter, actual laughter, as they routed an enemy that had once seemed invincible. When the battle finally ended, Zareth found himself standing amidst the carnage, his camera still recording. The humans were gathering their wounded, tending to them with an efficiency that suggested this wasn't their first grueling encounter. They moved among the Morricans, offering water, patches for wounds, and in some cases, words of encouragement. The alien warriors, still shaken by the events, accepted the gestures with a mix of gratitude and awe. Zareth approached the human commander, a grizzled man with a weathered face and piercing eyes. He introduced himself, hesitating only briefly before asking the question that had been burning in his mind since the humans had arrived. "Why do you fight like that? With such recklessness?" The commander chuckled, his voice gravelly but warm. "Reckless? Nah, we just don't quit. Can't quit. It's in our blood." As Zareth processed the response, he realized he had just witnessed something extraordinary. These weren't elite soldiers, trained in secret academies or enhanced with cutting-edge technology. These were regulars, ordinary men and women who fought with extraordinary determination. If this was what humanity considered average, Zareth couldn't begin to fathom what their elites might be like. The galaxy had long whispered tales of human soldiers, their legends spreading like wildfire among the various species of the Coalition, and even their enemies. What Zareth had witnessed on Dytha 7 was only the beginning. As he delved deeper into the stories of human regulars, the fragments of these whispered tales coalesced into a terrifying picture of a species that seemed to redefine warfare. Reports from every corner of the galaxy painted a consistent image of humanity's regular forces. They weren't extraordinary because of their equipment, quite the opposite. Their weapons were often criticized for being primitive by galactic standards, their armor barely a step above scraps. And yet they triumphed, again and again, against foes who outgunned and outnumbered them. The reason for this was both simple and unsettling: humans refused to lose. An account from the Ashrak Nebula campaign highlighted this unyielding spirit. A squad of human regulars had been pinned down for 2 standard days in a hostile jungle, cut off from reinforcements and supplies. By all metrics, they should have been wiped out. Yet when the relief forces finally arrived, they found the squad not only alive but thriving. They had used the jungle to their advantage, setting traps and ambushes, even turning poisonous local fauna into improvised weapons. Their ingenuity and determination had not only kept them alive but had inflicted massive casualties on an enemy force 3 times their size. Zareth listened to the story from a Morok commander who had fought alongside the humans during that campaign. The commander's voice trembled as he described how the humans had hacked through dense vegetation, their faces smeared with mud to blend into their surroundings. "They didn't look like soldiers," he said. "They looked like hunters. But the things they hunted weren't animals." The word hunters seemed to surface often when aliens spoke of human soldiers. They described their movements as predatory, their eyes filled with a singular focus that unnerved even their allies. Human soldiers didn't just engage the enemy, they stalked them, learning their habits and weaknesses, then striking with ruthless efficiency. This was no more evident than in the Battle of Crevan Ridge, where a small human unit managed to infiltrate a fortified enemy outpost. They had spent days observing the Krek's patrol patterns, dismantling their defenses piece by piece before launching a coordinated attack that left the enemy disoriented and defeated within hours. But it wasn't just their tactics that terrified their enemies, it was their willingness to endure. Stories of wounded human soldiers continuing to fight, even when severely injured, were commonplace. A particularly chilling tale came from the siege of Valtros 5, where a human soldier, missing an arm from an earlier explosion, had taken up a Krek's weapon and continued the fight. His squad mates had joked that he'd probably stitched himself back together if he had the time, but the alien witnesses didn't laugh. To them, the image of this bloodied, one-armed warrior charging into battle was the stuff of nightmares. What set humans apart wasn't just their physical endurance but their psychological resilience. Unlike many species in the Coalition, humans seemed immune to the kind of demoralization that often crippled armies. A report from a Krex intelligence officer revealed their frustration at trying to break the human spirit. When faced with dire odds, humans didn't surrender or retreat. They dug in, doubling down on their efforts. The officer's words were haunting. We threw everything at them. Superior firepower, psychological warfare, even targeted attacks on their supply lines. It didn't matter. They just kept coming. Perhaps the most telling trait of human regulars was their unity. To most species, warfare was a matter of hierarchy. Orders came from above, and subordinates followed without question. But with humans, it was different. Their soldiers fought not just for their leaders or their mission but for each other. Stories of human squads risking everything to rescue a wounded comrade, even under heavy fire, were so numerous that they had become the stuff of legend. An alien officer, after witnessing such an act, had remarked, "They fight as though losing one of their own is worse than losing the battle itself." This bond extended beyond their immediate units. Human soldiers often formed unlikely friendships with their alien allies, sharing stories and even meals despite language barriers. Zareth had seen it firsthand on Dythos 7, where the humans had tended to wounded Morican soldiers with the same care as their own. It was a stark contrast to the cold professionalism of most galactic militaries. To humans, war wasn't just a duty, it was deeply personal. And yet, for all their camaraderie and humor, there was a darker side to human warfare that unsettled even their closest allies. Humans had an uncanny ability to adapt, often in ways that bordered on the terrifying. During the Calthor offensive, human forces had used abandoned enemy weaponry against their foes, modifying it on the fly to suit their needs. One Krex general had infamously remarked, "Give them a stick and a rock, and they'll find a way to win." This adaptability extended to their use of the environment. On the ice world of Solithis III, human soldiers had weaponized the freezing temperatures, luring their enemies into ambushes by intentionally collapsing ice formations. On the desert planet of Tyner IV, they had turned sandstorms into an advantage, using them as cover to launch surprise attacks. To their enemies, it seemed as though humans could turn even the harshest conditions into an ally. Zareth couldn't help but marvel at the sheer audacity of this species. They had no genetic enhancements, no superior technology, and no ancient warrior traditions like many of their galactic counterparts. What they had was something far more dangerous, an unshakable belief in their ability to overcome any obstacle. It was a trait that bordered on arrogance but was tempered by their remarkable ability to deliver on that belief. The more Zareth learned about human regulars, the more he realized how deeply they had changed the nature of galactic warfare. Their enemies no longer viewed them as soldiers but as something more primal, more relentless. And their allies, while grateful for their victories, often found themselves uneasy in their presence. It wasn't just their actions on the battlefield that left an impression. It was the realization that, for humans, this was normal. These were their regulars. What, then, could their elites possibly be like? The question lingered in Zareth's mind, gnawing at him with a mixture of dread and curiosity. For now, the galaxy had learned to fear the human's average. What would happen when they met their extraordinary? The war had reached a boiling point. The Krex Dominion, emboldened by recent conquests, launched a full-scale invasion on Arthen Prime, a strategic hub at the heart of the Galactic Coalition. The planet's defenses were formidable, but the Krex had brought overwhelming firepower and numbers, deploying wave after wave of troops and bombarding key cities into ruin. Coalition forces, including human regulars, fought valiantly to hold the line, but the tide of battle was shifting. The situation grew so dire that the Coalition Council convened an emergency session, debating whether to abandon Arthen Prime to avoid further losses. It was then that the humans made an announcement that sent shockwaves through both allies and enemies alike. They were deploying their special forces. The term rippled across communication networks like a wildfire. Those familiar with humanity's regular troops were already aware of their tenacity, ingenuity, and terrifying combat prowess. The thought that humans had an elite unit beyond their regulars was a concept few could process. For many, it conjured images of something unthinkable, warriors so skilled, so lethal, that they made even the already feared regulars look tame. The Krek's high command dismissed it as a psychological tactic, though unease crept into their ranks. If the humans were bluffing, it was a bold move. But if they weren't, whispers began to circulate among their troops, causing cracks in their morale before the special forces even arrived. Zareth, now fully immersed in documenting humanity's rise in galactic warfare, managed to secure a spot accompanying the human forces. His request to embed with the special forces had been met with amused skepticism by the human command. "You can come," a senior officer had told him with a smirk. "But don't expect to see much. They don't leave loose ends, and they sure as hell don't leave witnesses." When the special forces made their first appearance on Arhen Prime, it was without fanfare. Unlike the regulars, who often relied on visible shows of strength to rally morale, these soldiers moved in shadows. Their armor was sleek, advanced, and utterly silent. Every movement was precise, deliberate, and efficient. To Zareth, they seemed less like soldiers and more like predatory specters, each one exuding an air of calm lethality. Their first mission was to infiltrate the heavily fortified Krek's command center orbiting Arhen Prime. The station was equipped with state-of-the-art defense systems, swarms of automated drones, and a garrison of elite Krek's warriors. It was considered impenetrable, a bastion that had repelled every previous coalition attempt to breach it. The human regulars hadn't even tried to take it, knowing it was a suicide mission. The special forces didn't hesitate. Zareth observed from the relative safety of a coalition command ship as the mission unfolded. The human elite soldiers disabled the station's communications within moments, severing its connection to the Krek's fleet. Surveillance footage captured fleeting glimpses of their movements, blurred figures weaving through corridors, neutralizing guards with precision strikes that left no room for retaliation. They used no heavy weaponry, relying instead on small, specialized tools that incapacitated or killed with chilling efficiency. Within hours, the station's defenses were offline, its commanders either dead or captured. The coalition fleet seized the opportunity to launch a coordinated strike, crippling the Krex's orbital presence and shifting the momentum of the battle. The operation was so seamless, so flawlessly executed, that many coalition commanders struggled to believe it had been carried out by living beings rather than advanced AI. Zareth, though awestruck, was left with more questions than answers. He had expected the special forces to be louder, more theatrical, like their regular counterparts. Instead, they were quiet, clinical, and disturbingly effective. Their methods lacked the chaotic energy of the regulars but possessed a level of precision that was equally terrifying. The next day, the special forces were deployed to the planet's surface. The Kreks had established a heavily fortified position in the ruins of Arhen City, using civilians as hostages to deter coalition attacks. It was a calculated move, one designed to exploit the coalition's strict adherence to the laws of war. The human regulars, despite their unmatched courage, were at a standstill, unable to advance without risking civilian lives. The special forces solved the problem in under 6 hours. They infiltrated the city under the cover of darkness, disabling Krek's patrols without a single alarm being raised. Using advanced reconnaissance technology and careful coordination, they identified every hostage's location and neutralized the Krek's guards with surgical precision. By dawn, the civilians had been evacuated, and the Krek's forces were in disarray, cut off from reinforcements and surrounded by coalition troops. What struck Zareth most wasn't just the effectiveness of the operation but the aftermath. The special forces didn't linger to celebrate their victory, or even acknowledge the coalition troops they had just saved. They vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving only rumors and speculation in their wake. For many, it was as if they had never been there at all. The Krex's confidence crumbled after that. Their troops, already wary of human regulars, now lived in constant fear of an unseen threat. Stories spread of soldiers disappearing in the night, of entire outposts rendered silent without a single shot being fired. The psychological toll was immense. Krek's commanders began abandoning strategic positions, unwilling to risk encounters with what they now called the Ghosts. Among coalition forces, the special forces were revered but also feared. Unlike the regulars, who inspired camaraderie and respect, these elites operated on a level that felt alien even to their allies. Their presence was a reminder that humans were capable of far more than anyone had imagined, and that even their closest allies didn't fully understand what they were dealing with. Zareth documented everything he could, though he was painfully aware of how much he didn't know. The Special Forces' true numbers, their training methods, and the extent of their capabilities were closely guarded secrets. What little he learned came from snippets of conversation overheard among regular soldiers, hushed mentions of brutal training regimens, experimental technologies, and missions so classified that even high-ranking officers weren't privy to the details. But one thing was clear: the Special Forces weren't just an elite unit. They were a statement. Their existence served as a chilling reminder that humanity, for all its apparent flaws and limitations, had barely begun to show the galaxy what it was capable of. And if this was what they called special, Zareth couldn't help but wonder what other horrors they might still be hiding. The aftermath of the Special Forces operations left the galaxy reeling. The Kreks, once feared as a dominant force, were in disarray. Their confidence had been shattered, their strategies disrupted, and their morale drained. Yet, amidst the devastation, a question lingered among the coalition forces and their allies: how could humans have created two military forces so different, yet equally terrifying? The difference between the regulars and the Special Forces was more than just skill or technology, it was philosophy. Regulars embodied raw adaptability and sheer willpower, thriving in chaos and making the most out of whatever was available. They were relentless, resourceful, and impossible to demoralize. Special Forces, on the other hand, operated with surgical precision, eliminating threats with cold efficiency before the enemy even knew they were there. It was like comparing a hurricane to a scalpel, one overwhelming through sheer force, the other through focused, deliberate action. The regulars were the face of humanity's military might, a symbol of their unyielding nature. Their presence on the battlefield inspired both terror and admiration, not just because of their skill but because of their unpredictability. They fought like they lived, improvising, adapting, and pushing beyond the limits of what anyone thought was possible. For the coalition, they were a beacon of hope, proof that even against impossible odds, victory was achievable. For their enemies, they were a nightmare. Reports from surviving Krek soldiers described the regulars as impossible to stop. They would use enemy weapons, turn captured supplies into makeshift bombs, and fight with the determination of beings who didn't know the meaning of surrender. A Krek's officer, captured during the siege of the Rose Station, recounted his terror at facing a human platoon. They weren't soldiers. They were something else. They laughed as they charged, even when the odds were against them. We thought they were mad, until they won. In contrast, the Special Forces operated in silence, their work largely unseen by both allies and enemies. They didn't inspire rallies or chants, they inspired silence and unease. Coalition troops respected them, of course, but there was always a distance, an unspoken recognition that these operatives were different. They weren't there to bond or build camaraderie. They were there to complete the mission, no matter the cost. Zareth's observations revealed a startling truth: the Special Forces amplified the fear created by the regulars. The two groups were distinct in their methods, but together, they created a psychological effect that no single force could achieve. Regulars broke the enemy's will through relentless assaults, showing them that resistance was futile. Special Forces cemented that fear, eliminating key targets with such precision and stealth that the enemy was left wondering when, not if, they would be struck next. For the Kreks, this combination was devastating. Their high command, already paranoid from their defeats against the regulars, now lived in constant fear of the unseen. The mere mention of Special Forces deployments caused entire battalions to retreat, abandoning critical positions without a fight. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, a demonstration of how fear itself could be weaponized. The coalition's leadership began to study the human model, hoping to replicate its success. But as Zareth learned, this wasn't something that could be copied. The strength of humanity's military came from their cultural mindset, their innate ability to adapt and endure. Other species had rigid doctrines, traditions, and hierarchies. Humans, by contrast, thrived in uncertainty. They didn't need the best equipment or the most advanced technology. They simply needed the opportunity to fight. One of the most telling moments came during a private conversation Zareth overheard between a human regular and a coalition officer. The officer, clearly shaken by the carnage of a recent battle, asked the soldier how they could keep going in the face of such overwhelming odds. The human shrugged and replied, "We're used to it. You call it war, we call it life." This mindset extended beyond the battlefield. Humans approached every challenge with the same determination and creativity. Whether it was building settlements on hostile planets or surviving resource shortages, they found ways to adapt. In war, this mindset became their greatest weapon. Regulars embodied it in their chaotic, relentless approach, while special forces refined it into a precise, almost mechanical efficiency. Yet, for all their differences, there was one trait both groups shared: loyalty. Humans didn't just fight for their species or their commanders, they fought for each other. It was a bond that transcended strategy or logic, a deeply ingrained sense of responsibility to those who fought alongside them. This loyalty wasn't confined to their own kind either. Many alien soldiers recounted stories of humans risking their lives to save them, even in the heat of battle. Zareth came to understand that this loyalty was both a strength and a source of their terrifying reputation. To their enemies, it made them unpredictable and relentless. To their allies, it made them indispensable but also intimidating. The galaxy had seen soldiers who fought for glory, for honor, or for survival. But humans fought for something deeper, something primal, and it set them apart in a way that no training or technology could replicate. The distinction between regulars and special forces wasn't just about skill, it was about purpose. Regulars were the unstoppable tide, overwhelming the enemy with sheer force and ingenuity. Special forces were the scalpel, striking with precision and leaving no room for recovery. Together, they created a dynamic that no other species had managed to achieve. One fought to break the enemy's will, the other ensured they never recovered. As Zareth reflected on what he had learned, he realized that humanity's military wasn't just a product of their biology or their history. It was a reflection of who they were as a species, adaptable, resilient, and unyielding. And while the galaxy had come to fear their warriors, Zareth couldn't help but wonder if this was only the beginning. After all, humans had a habit of exceeding expectations, often in ways no one could predict. For the Coalition, this was a source of hope. For their enemies, it was a source of dread. And for Zareth, it was a story that he knew would be told for generations to come. The final days of the Krex invasion of Arthen Prime were a study in chaos and inevitability. The combined might of the Galactic Coalition, bolstered by human forces, had driven the Krex to the brink. Their fleet was scattered, their ground forces demoralized, and their command structure in shambles. Yet the Krex, a species known for their unyielding pride, refused to surrender. Instead, they consolidated their remaining forces in a desperate bid to fortify their last stronghold, a sprawling fortress carved into the jagged cliffs of the Selira Plateau. The fortress was a marvel of Krex engineering, designed to withstand orbital bombardments and ground assaults alike. Its location made it nearly inaccessible, surrounded by sheer cliffs and treacherous terrain. Coalition commanders hesitated, knowing that a direct assault would result in catastrophic losses. Even the humans' regular forces, as formidable as they were, would struggle to breach such a fortified position without suffering significant casualties. It was in this moment of uncertainty that the humans made a bold decision: the special forces would lead the final strike. The announcement sent ripples through the coalition ranks, stirring equal parts anticipation and unease. The regulars had already proven their worth, and their victories were the stuff of legend. But the special forces? They were still an enigma, a shadowy presence whose actions were whispered about but rarely witnessed. As the mission unfolded, it became clear why the special forces were feared even by their own allies. They didn't march into battle with the boisterous energy of the regulars. There were no rallying cries or inspiring speeches. Instead, they moved with silent precision, their presence barely perceptible even to those fighting alongside them. It was as if the battlefield itself bent to their will, clearing paths for their movements and obscuring them from the enemy's view. The Kreks, for all their preparations, were unprepared for what came next. The first sign of the Special Forces' presence was the sudden disappearance of their surveillance drones. Within moments, communication lines were severed, leaving the Kreks' command isolated and blind. Then, one by one, the outer defenses of the fortress fell. It wasn't the explosive, chaotic assault the Kreks had expected, it was surgical, deliberate, and terrifyingly efficient. Inside the fortress, panic began to spread. Krek soldiers, seasoned veterans who had faced countless battles, found themselves gripped by a primal fear. They spoke of shadows moving through the corridors, of unseen foes who struck without warning and disappeared before they could retaliate. Entire squads vanished, their weapons and equipment left behind as grim reminders of the unseen threat. By the time the coalition forces launched their main assault, the Kreks' defenses were in complete disarray. The fortress, once a symbol of their strength, had become a tomb. Coalition troops advanced with minimal resistance, their path cleared by the meticulous work of the Special Forces. What should have been a grueling, weeks-long siege was over in a matter of hours. When the dust settled, Zareth stood among the coalition soldiers, recording the aftermath for the Galactic News Nexus. The fortress was in ruins, its once imposing walls reduced to rubble. Kreks' commanders were taken into custody, their faces blank with shock. But what struck Zareth most was the reaction of the human regulars. They weren't celebrating or cheering as he had seen them do after previous victories. Instead, they stood in solemn silence, their gazes turned toward the horizon where the Special Forces had disappeared. It was a stark contrast that highlighted the difference between the two groups. The regulars were human in every sense of the word, loud, emotional, and driven by a sense of shared purpose. The Special Forces, on the other hand, seemed almost otherworldly. Their actions were precise and devoid of the chaotic energy that defined the regulars. It was as if they existed outside the bounds of normal warfare, operating on a level that others could only begin to comprehend. In the days that followed, Zareth pieced together the details of the mission from scattered reports and reluctant interviews. What he learned only deepened his awe and unease. The Special Forces had not only dismantled the Kreks' defenses but had done so with an efficiency that defied explanation. They had anticipated every move, exploited every weakness, and executed their plans with a level of precision that bordered on the supernatural. But it wasn't just their methods that left an impression, it was their impact. The Kreks, once the most feared military force in the galaxy, were broken. Their remaining forces surrendered en masse, unwilling to face the possibility of encountering the Special Forces again. Coalition leaders, while relieved by the victory, couldn't shake the lingering sense of unease that came with relying on such a force. Zareth, ever the chronicler, struggled to find the right words to describe what he had witnessed. The humans' regulars were terrifying enough, a force of nature that seemed unstoppable in its raw determination. But the Special Forces were something else entirely. They weren't just soldiers, they were a statement, a testament to humanity's capacity for both innovation and destruction. As Zareth composed his final report, he found himself reflecting on the deeper implications of humanity's rise. The galaxy had always seen itself as a place of order, governed by rules and traditions. Even in war, there were unspoken boundaries, lines that no one dared to cross. But humanity had come from a place of chaos, a world where survival often depended on breaking the rules. That ethos had shaped their approach to war, making them both unpredictable and unstoppable. In his closing remarks, Zareth posed a question that he knew would linger in the minds of his readers: what was the true purpose of the Special Forces? Were they simply an elite unit, a tool for achieving the impossible? Or were they something more, a glimpse into humanity's future, a reflection of what they might become if pushed to their limits? The report ended with a chilling thought. If humanity's regulars were already feared across the galaxy, and their Special Forces had become the stuff of nightmares, what else might they be hiding? What other forces, what other capabilities lay dormant, waiting for the right moment to be unleashed? For now, the galaxy could only speculate. But one thing was certain: the name, Special Forces, wasn't just a designation. It was a warning. And for those who dared to oppose humanity, it was a reminder that they hadn't yet faced the full extent of what humans were capable of.